Long before empires rose and fell, before kings and warriors etched their names into stone, before the written word captured our legends, there was a war. Not just a war of swords and shields, but a war of fate, love, pride, and divine vengeance. A war where the gods themselves took sides, and mortals carried their wrath across burning sands and blood-soaked plains. This is the tale of the Iliad, a story born in fire and fury, a song of rage and honor that still echoes after 3,000 years. It is not the story of how the Trojan War ended. It is the story of how it broke men into legends. Chapter 1. The Wrath of Achilles. 9 long years have passed since the Greeks set sail across the Aegean Sea to lay siege to the mighty city of Troy. They had come for Helen, queen of Sparta, who was taken by Paris, prince of Troy. But by the 9th year, the war had become something far darker than the rescue of a stolen queen. It had become a graveyard of heroes. At the heart of the Greek forces was their mightiest warrior, Achilles, son of the sea goddess Thetis and the mortal Peleus. No man on earth could match his speed, his skill, or his fury in battle. But Achilles was not only powerful. He was proud, and his pride was his flame. When Agamemnon, the commander of the Greek army, was forced to give up his own war prize to appease the gods, he turned to Achilles and seized the woman Briseis from him as compensation. Briseis was more than a prize. She was someone Achilles cherished. And in that single act of arrogance, Agamemnon shattered the fragile unity of the Greek forces. Burning with rage, Achilles withdrew from the war. He refused to lift his sword, refused to fight. And the Greeks, without their champion, began to suffer heavy losses. This is not just the story of a war. It is the story of a man whose pride would bring armies to their knees. Chapter 2. The gods take sides. Far above the blood and dust of the battlefield, the gods of Olympus watched the war unfold like a game. They were not impartial. Athena, wise and fierce, favored the Greeks, especially Odysseus and Diomedes. Hera, queen of the gods, shared that loyalty, her hatred for Troy as old as the feud over the golden apple. But Aphrodite, goddess of love, defended the Trojans, for Paris had chosen her as the fairest. Apollo, the radiant sun god, rained down plague on the Greeks to avenge a Trojan priest. Even Poseidon, lord of the sea, intervened for the Greeks when his anger stirred. At the center of all stood Zeus, king of the gods, attempting to maintain the balance of fate. But even he was not immune to the manipulations of goddesses and the prayers of mortals. This was not a mortal war alone. It was a divine conflict, where every spear cast echoed in the heavens, and every death satisfied some immortal grudge. Chapter 3. Heroes and Honor. As Achilles sat brooding in his tent, the Greeks struggled, and in the chaos rose a shining figure, Hector, prince of Troy. Hector was not driven by glory or rage. He was bound by duty, love, and the desperate hope of protecting his city and family. He stood as Troy's greatest shield, a warrior whose strength was matched by his compassion. Day after day, Hector pushed back the Greek forces. He struck down heroes and inspired his people with courage and resolve. To the Trojans, he was their hope. To the Greeks, he was a nightmare in bronze. Unlike Achilles, Hector knew the weight of war, not as a personal offense, but as a burden he carried for his wife, his child, his father, and his people. His honor would define him, and his death would define the turning point of the Iliad. Chapter 4. Patroclus' fall. While Achilles refused to fight, his heart remained tied to the battlefield. He could not ignore the cries of the wounded, nor the pleas of his dearest companion, Patroclus. Patroclus, desperate to help their suffering comrades, begged Achilles to let him lead the Myrmidons, his elite warriors, into battle. Achilles, still too proud to return himself, agreed. He gave Patroclus his armor, so that the enemy might believe Achilles had returned. And when Patroclus charged into battle, the Greeks rallied. For a brief, shining moment, the tide of war shifted. Trojans fell, driven back by the ghost of Achilles. But Patroclus, carried by the heat of battle, went too far. He met Hector face to face. Hector struck him down. And with that blow, the wrath of Achilles reignited. When Achilles learned of Patroclus' death, he did not weep with tears alone. He wept with a fury that set the sky aflame. Chapter 5. The Return of the Demigod. Achilles did not return to war with strategy or with speeches. He returned as a force of nature, clad in new armor, forged by the god Hephaestus himself. His shield told the story of all mankind. And now Achilles would write his own chapter in blood. He charged into the battlefield like a god of war. Trojans fled at the sight of him. Even the river Scamander rose up in rage at the number of bodies he cast into its waters. He did not seek trophies. He did not seek Helen. He sought only vengeance. And nothing in this world or the next could stop him. Chapter 6. The Duel at Troy's Gates. At last, the inevitable arrived. Hector stood before the gates of Troy, knowing that death awaited him. His parents begged him to retreat, to survive. But honor demanded he face the man whose friend he had slain. The duel was fierce, brutal, and swift. Achilles drove his spear through Hector's body, and then, in a display of cold fury, he tied Hector's corpse to his chariot and dragged it through the dust. It was an act of rage, of grief, and of something darker. The Trojans watched in horror, and the gods watched with unease. The Greeks watched in awe, for even they knew the line between hero and monster had been crossed. Chapter 7. The Tears of Priam. That night, as Achilles sat with his grief, a visitor approached his tent. It was not a warrior. It was not a god. It was Priam, the aged king of Troy. He came alone, unarmed, broken. He knelt before Achilles, the man who had killed his son, and he did not curse him. He did not beg for victory. He asked for the body of Hector, so that a father might bury his child. In that moment, something inside Achilles cracked. He saw his own father in Priam. He saw the cost of wrath. And he wept, not just for Patroclus, but for himself. With gentle hands, he returned Hector's body. And for a brief moment, two enemies shared a silence deeper than any victory. Epilogue. The end before the end. The Iliad does not end with a Trojan horse. It does not show the fall of Troy or the death of Achilles. Those stories belong to later epics. The Iliad ends with a funeral, a prince buried with honor, a moment of peace carved from a decade of war. Because the Iliad is not truly about how the war ended. It is about the men who lived and died inside it. It is about how rage can consume even the noblest hearts, how pride can divide kings and shatter armies, and how grief can make a godlike warrior remember he is still a man. The Iliad is a song of war, but it is also a song of humanity, a mirror to our ancient soul. And 3,000 years later, we are still listening.